Okay. Now, this class is actually based on a course called Tactics by Gregory Kokel. It is a fantastic book. I'd recommend anybody picking this up. Definitely. Okay, I'm sorry. I would definitely recommend anybody picking this up because this is definitely kind of the curriculum in a sense what we're going to be going over. You don't have to buy it for this class, but we're definitely scratching the surface of what this book entails. So if you get a chance, to pick up. If you like what we're teaching, definitely pick that book up. I know as a teacher of this particular series, I want to jump right into the tactics itself. It's this stuff I'm telling you is powerful. It's really fun to do and learn. But the problem is we have to lay a proper foundation first. When that actually became gold certified in teaching the tactics class, what we're going over today is exactly what the first session is on the audio series. So, and I would suggest, or I would highly encourage each person here that if they do find this stuff interesting, to try and become gold certified in this. You can do that by going to str.org, and we'll talk more about that in the later weeks. But it's important to highlight, and I'll say this again in the future too, the tactics you'll learn are not tricks. They're not meant to turn people into pretzels. They are powerful in the realm of ideas, the idea exchange. It's kind of funny when people ask what I do for fun outside of work. I always tell them how to argue with other people, and they get a laugh, and it's like, no, it's true. But that brings us to the next slide. And what we want to do is define what an argument actually is. Because when you start talking to people about arguments, the first thing you think of is what? Probably quarreling, fighting. But that's not what an argument is at all. An argument is meant to find truth, right? It is the table in which ideas are placed, and we weigh each of those ideas out to find out what the better idea is, so that we can let the other ones go. An argument is not division. However, it does divide truth from error. It's a vital division that we do need in our church. 2 Timothy 2:23-26 says, "Don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments, because you know they produce quarrels, and the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. Opponents must be gently instructed in the hope that God will grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of the truth, and that they will come to their senses and escape from the trap of the devil, who has taken them captive to do his will." Go ahead and advance to the next slide. And what is his will? Well, I will say this: in the 21st century, we as Christians, we have our work cut out for us. Our world is changing, and it's not in a good way. Especially in the past couple months, you see hostilities and tensions growing ever more and more and more, and it's becoming ridiculous. The problem is the argument is everything. And I'll say it again, the argument is everything. And when there are no more arguments to make, society will break down. When no dialogues are made, communication breaks down, and the rule of law becomes might makes right. A civilization only grows when arguments are made. The argument is everything. Go ahead and turn to the next slide. As Christ's ambassadors, I would like for this to become your mantra. 2 Corinthians 5:18-20 says, "All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ, and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against him. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God." Go ahead and turn to the next slide. If you guys notice, there is a specific theme going on here. What is that? How many times? 5 times it says reconciled, reconciliation. That's our message. That is our message as Christ's ambassadors. This is the message we're trying to get to people. Be reconciled to God. That's what we're trying to inform people. But this is our, like the Christ Ambassador Creed, it should be. So, but there's 2 very important points Paul is trying to make. Go ahead and advance to the next slide. One is if you call yourself a Christian, guess what? You're already an ambassador. Congratulations. You didn't even know it. But you are an ambassador for good or for ill, whether you like it or not. Right now, I'm an ambassador not only to Jesus and the Church of Christ, but also an ambassador to the organization Stand to Reason. Stand to Reason is who I got my gold certification from to teach this type of class. And you're going to draw conclusions about that organization by your interactions with me through this material. Similarly, people are going to draw conclusions about God by their interactions with all of us, right? So we are Christ's ambassadors. It is just as if God were speaking through us. That's the second point. You may be the only living Bible some people ever read. There was an author that once wrote, there are 2 reasons why people don't become Christians. One is because they don't know any Christians. 2 is because they do. For good or for ill. So go ahead and turn to the next slide. As an ambassador to America, who does the president send to other countries to represent him? Who's that guy?
Secretary of State.
Secretary of State. That's right. So why did he send the Secretary of State and say, I don't know, like Homer Simpson? Why wouldn't he send Homer Simpson? Because he's stupid, right? He has no tact. He's obnoxious. Yes, yes, and yes. There are specific qualities to an ambassador that they must have to be effectual in bringing the message of the sovereign, which is our God, to other people. And and we break it down into 3 categories. One is knowledge, and we say that with an accurately informed mind. The second one is wisdom, with an artful method, and the third is character, in an attractive manner. Go ahead and proceed to the next slide. So the first thing, knowledge. If we were an ambassador, or let's say an ambassador is sent, and we're not talking about Christian ambassadors at the time, we're just talking about worldly ambassadors. We have the ambassador would need to have a specific type of knowledge. He needs to be thoroughly acquainted with who and what he represents, his sovereign and his sovereign's intention, right? And not only that, he needs to know the wishes, the plans, so he can actually represent the king's desires. He also needs to know the people and the obstacles that he'll run into that will be a challenge for the message he's trying to be communicated, right? Go ahead and proceed to the next slide. An ambassador must have wisdom, right? That's the second part. He must have a sensitivity to his audience. What's another name for an ambassador that starts with a D? A diplomat. And what's important for a diplomat to be? Diplomatic, right? Which includes a tactical wisdom of being able to maneuver inside of a conversation in any given situation. Someone who can contextualize the message and make it clear to his audience. Someone who can employ the right use of the knowledge. So let's get to the next. And the third one is the character. In fact, we found this, it's a pretty good picture. Live in such a way that if someone spoke badly of you, no one would believe it. Has anyone ever been to a speech where someone comes across as arrogant or rude or flat out offensive? Yeah. Can anyone think of a person right now who might fit that description? Some people might say, well, he's tweeting W right now. How about Hollywood? Tired of more important people telling you what to think? How about Facebook friends? Tired of people's opinions? And what turns us off to these types of characters? What turns us off to that kind of stuff? Not an attractive manner, for sure. But, are some of these people looking for truth? Choosing one side of the argument, don't they? For the most part? Because they're not listening to the other side. And people want the moral high ground. That's the way people come across it. You want to hear what people have to say, but their personal character ruins the message. As an ambassador is the package of knowledge and wisdom come in. If he is if he's a womanizer, a drunkard, flat out rude, you can see how that would undermine the message. He or she is critical to making the sovereign's message effective. His character will speak louder than words, and it will make or break the mission he's sent to do. We found a video clip. We're going to go ahead and start to the next slide. We found a video clip that will actually portray exactly what we're trying, like the message that we're trying to communicate as an ambassador.
Good. Now, you want to know how to win a sword fight? Well, be the only one with a sword. Come on, now. Give him a hand. He fought well. Well done, John. Winner takes all, my friends. Winner takes all. One more challenger and I'll be on my way. Once in a lifetime, there comes a fighter so powerful, so fast, so fearless that no man can touch him. And while you're waiting for him to come along, you can practice on me. As sure as the sun will rise tomorrow, somewhere, there's a man who's better than me. Could be here. Could be today.
Go on. Yeah!
Could be you. Looks strong. Is he good?
Try him and see.
Go on, Mark. Only don't hurt him.
It's you, Mark, are you? That's my name. I'm Lancelot. You ready?
Ready.
Well, you don't have to kill me to win, you know. Right. Got tight hold of your sword?
Don't you worry about that!
Good. Now, can I give you some advice?
What's that?
Don't drop your sword. Is this your sword? Well done. Give him a hand! Well done, Mark.
How did you do that? How did he do that?
Was that a trick? No. No trick. It's a way of fight. Could I do it?
Tell me. I can learn.
You have to study your opponent, how he moves, so you know what he's going to do before he does it.
I can do that.
You have to know that one moment in every fight when you win or lose, and you have to know how to wait for it.
I can do that.
And you have to not care whether you live or die.
You know, the look of Mark is bigger and stronger, right? Isn't that kind of how we kind of sometimes see, like, the arguments of the world coming at us? I mean, a lot of times they're come at with such a force that it's intimidating, to say the least. You know, but you know, how can we take those kinds of things on? You know, Mark was striking wildly at the air. You know, our opposition throws countless attacks that we were supposed to defend against. But Lancelot, you know, bobbing and weaving, he's like simply dodging him. It isn't until Mark makes that first mistake when he splits the wood that Lancelot makes his move against him. He's waiting for that moment, and that moment is when our tactics come into play. And again, that's what we're going to be teaching next week and how to do that. But what was the first thing that well, actually, I guess I'll probably tell you because I don't know if anybody heard it or not. But you know, when Mark comes up to him and says, you know, is this a trick? And remember, I told you these are not tricks. And he says, no, these are not tricks. This is a way of fighting. He's like, well, can you teach me how to do it? He's like, yeah. He's like, the first thing is you have to know your opponent, and you got to know what he's going to do before he does it. It's like, I can do that. He's like, then you got to wait for that moment in the fight, whether you win or lose, and you got to know how to wait for it. I can do that. And he says, and you have to not care whether you live or die. And then he just stops. But I mean, knowing your opponent, knowledge, waiting for the moment, the tactics, the wisdom, and then caring not whether you live or die is the character that makes those 3 points perfectly. And we'll elaborate more on that. Eric's going to pick it up from here.
Don't worry for those listening at home. We look the same. We just sound a little different. Don't even have to adjust your screens. Okay, so again, yeah, going into the Christian ambassador, because we talked before about just being a regular ambassador. Being the Christian ambassador, first thing we're going to look at is knowledge. having a basic knowledge that's necessary for the task, which is reconciling people to God. And so looking at, when we talk about knowledge, we have to know the Lord, and we have to know the message that He wants to convey to the people that He's reaching out to, that we're reaching out to. How do we gain this knowledge? Where would we find that particular type of knowledge? In the Bible, right? So let me ask you just a show of hands. Who here has read the Bible all the way through, from cover to cover? Okay, it's actually a really good representation here. That's awesome. Because a lot of times, we do this class for some of the younger Christians, and not a whole lot of hands go up. So, obviously, we always want to encourage people to read the Bible all the way through, from cover to cover. A lot of us will read, the Harry Potter novels or, the Aragon series, different things like that, and, Twilight. I'm not going to judge anybody. But, you look at that, and the Harry Potter series is, if you read from the beginning to the end, is actually twice the length of the Bible. So people who are like, oh, the Bible's too long, it's too boring. Like, hey, if you can read all the Harry Potter series, you could have read the Bible twice. That's how long it is. But you would never want to go to a doctor who didn't know anatomy or medicine. You wouldn't want to go to a lawyer who doesn't know the law, and you wouldn't go to a teacher who only taught from Cliff Notes. So why would people come to you about Christianity if you've never read the Bible? That's the kind of the mindset that we should have. And once you get through the Bible, go through it again. Go through the different translations. Get a rich feel for what the Bible's trying to say. What the these because some of the various interpretations aren't. They're just some a little bit of word semantics, but you can get a much richer knowledge of what the authors were trying to say by studying out these various versions. There's once I took a Bible class at IUPUI, and woo represent. For the campus people listening, but when I went through the Bible class, there was one particular time when there was a girl in our class, and the class was challenging. Every day I went in, the teacher challenged me something about what I believed about Christianity, but it was amazing. I loved it because I was a young Christian. I was learning the history, and it just kind of meshed what I believed with why I believed it, and I loved it. But that wasn't the case for everybody in the class. There was one girl one day who got up in the middle of the class crying and ran out of the class, and she never came back. Like that, it can have that effect. Sometimes we get so meshed into what we think we know that we're not, when we get the actual truth of it, it can wreck us. But at the same, I would hope as disciples and wanting to be better ambassadors that wouldn't necessarily be the case. So knowledge is important. It's important to other people, and it's important to us to be able to understand what we believe and why we believe it. Another thing too is understanding, getting a grasp of the foundational knowledge concerning the kingdom as it applies to today's current culture. Knowing the facts of Christianity, that's huge. It's not necessarily that we all have to be theologians, but you can't know nothing. That's the reason why when we come to this class, yes, we can teach you the tactics, but don't use tactics to beat people up if you wanted to. But yeah, without the Bible, you wouldn't even need to use the Bible. But trying to be a good Christian ambassador, it's important that you know something. And so again, I'm encouraged with the number of people here who read the Bible from cover to cover. That's really good. In Jude 1:3, it's written, "Dear friends, although I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt compelled to write and urge you to contend for the faith that was once for all entrusted to God's holy people." So it talks about contending for the faith. 2 Timothy 1:14 says, "Guard your heart through the Holy Spirit who dwells in us, the treasure which has been entrusted to you, the message of the cross." So, we've been entrusted with this message, and we have to make sure that we are using it properly. The next slide. So and it's important that we know the obstacles that we're going to encounter on this diplomatic mission. Knowing what we call the false prophecies or philosophies of the age. Knowing the arguments that people are going to bring up against you. Can anyone think of any arguments going on right now against Christianity, or that people tend to use against Christianity? Like, what are some things that you hear? Too narrow-minded. Judgy. Yeah, telling people what to do. Not accepting of all people, right? It was Sunday is the most segregated day of the week, is that what they say? But like knowing what people are going to argue against you, that's part of what you'll think about the sword fight when he says you got to know your opponent, you got to know the moves he's going to make before he makes it. Paying attention to society and paying attention to the arguments, looking at news articles, watching videos of atheists. Trust me, YouTube is full of them. Hearing these arguments, and you start to hear the same arguments being made over and over again. And if you know how to defend against those things, then you can start to know your opponent before, or better than they know themselves. You can know what they're going to do and when they're going to do it. You have to have the knowledge of the questions that you're hearing. And these questions, these challenges, they're constantly changing. What we're arguing about today is not what we were arguing about the first time we taught this class. And Chris showed the pictures in the beginning there, the rides, things like that. Like that wasn't going on the first time that we taught this class. But it just shows where society is heading. Chris talked about the shutting down of ideas, the shutting down of like not challenging each other based on the knowledge that we have, not looking for the truth, just looking for a fight. That's the problem. One of the big things of the 21st century is moral relativism. That's a huge argument. What's right for you is right for you. What's right for me is right for me. There is no truth. There is no real objective morality. That people try to make these claims. Well, we've got some great tools on how to fight those things, and sometimes just pointing those things out to people, these arguments they're making, and the nonsensicalness of it is really all you have to do. Colossians 2:8 says, "See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces." 2 Corinthians 10:3-5 says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of a fortress. We are destroying speculations or theories, and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ." He's talking about the battle of ideas. If you guys want to advance the next slide. I went too far. Okay. Next, what we're talking about is the wisdom of Christian ambassador. Basically, it's using that knowledge, putting it into action. Obviously, doing it in a skillful way will help. An element of wisdom that basically makes the message persuasive. It's about maneuvering, knowing the right words for the moment to maneuver through difficult waters. And it puts you in the driver's seat. Many cases, it can stop a challenger in his tracks and turn the tables and get the person thinking. The tactics are absolutely critical. One of the tactics we're going to talk about, a couple of the tactics we're going to talk about next week are things what we call the Columbo tactics. Everybody ever watched the TV show Columbo? It's like this kind of, you don't really know what it is. It's basically this kind of detective who seems like really aloof. He doesn't seem like he's all together there all the time. He's asking tons and tons of questions all the time, and a lot of times by asking these questions, he ends up trapping the person that did the crime into their own words, and he exposes people that way. And really, that's kind of what we're sort of going to be teaching. The other thing to talk about is what we call suicide tactics. It's basically self-refuting arguments people tend to make. For example, I know one time Lee had done the midweek where you started throwing out questions, and you remember one of them where these different claims. You said there is no truth, and he's walking around because you were handing out candy, and he's like, there is no truth, and I raised my hand, and he's like, how would you argue that? And I was like, is that true? And he's like, is what true? I said, is that statement you just said true? And he was like, here, you can have the bag of candy. But that's that's a suicidal argument. It's an easy one to spot. There is no truth. Well, is that true? There are no absolutes. Is that an absolute? There are just certain things, like I said, that are very simple, and that's some stuff we're going to take a look at. But we're going to teach you basically how to gain information, get out of the hot seat, reverse the burden of proof, and how to exploit weaknesses or flaws in other people's view. Because the wisdom part of that, when he's in the video when they're sword fighting, he says you got to know, you have to know for that one moment when you're going to strike, you got to know how to wait for it. And that's exactly what you're going to be doing. You're going to be asking questions until you get to the part where you hear an exact set of words that you're looking for, and then you're going to strike. And that's basically what we're going to teach you how to do. If you want to go to the next slide. We're going to use wisdom for clarification. Clear meaning using language and terms that are intelligible, and persuasive, presenting the truth in a compelling way, adapting your message to the specific person or the circumstances. Steve Cannon had talked to my brother and I about doing this class, and sort of, why don't we do like a tactics class like on Judaism or Pentecostalism or Jehovah's Witnesses, Islam, kind of specifying this particular class for those things, but it's actually kind of impossible to do only because of the fact that using these tactics is the way to do that, because someone could say that they believe in Islam or they're Islamic or they're Jehovah's Witness, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they hold to everything that congregation teaches. There are tons of different sects, there are tons of different denominations, even in Islam and Judaism. I mean, there's so many different Eastern religions especially too. It's people tend to differ on what it is they specifically believe. You can't can't be like, oh well, you believe this, so here I'm shutting you down. Like, no, they may not believe that. And this wisdom thing, like gaining the information from the people, having these conversations, is to clarify exactly what it is that they believe, going on this information trek so that you completely understand what it is they believe, and then using your wisdom to help the person through that and come to a better knowledge of God. If you were an ambassador for France, for example, and you went to France and you couldn't speak the language, how effective can you be, versus knowing the culture, the language, the history, etc.? Colossians 4:5 says, "Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned as it were with salt, so that you may know how you should respond to each person." And I like how the Bible says that, each person. You have to understand people. And really, that's the difference between the world today and us, is that we need to get to care about people specifically. You can't just go in and assume that you're going to know everything about that person just because of a particular part of their background. Learn about that person. Have them over. Be hospitable, like the Bible says. Get to know them. And then find out their arguments. Repeat exactly what it is that they said back to them so that you have a firm understanding of exactly what it is that they believe. The scripture was Colossians 4:6. And did you want to talk about your... and Chris is going to talk about one particular example he had about this. You're going to hear a lot about my old work that I used to work for, because I used to get into a lot of these type of, arguments all the time, biblical arguments and things like that. One in particular came up when I was in my office, and my office was adjacent to my coworker, and he was talking with a Sharp representative who wasn't. He was trying to. They were getting some sort of religious conversation, and my coworker, being the atheist, was prompting this person and saying something like, he brought up that he was a Christian, whatever. He's like, "Oh, you're a Christian." He's like, are you? And he had said something about he's like, "Oh, are you sleeping with your girlfriend?" He said, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, well then you're going to hell." And I was like, "Oh, this is escalating quickly." And I'm just listening from the next room over, and I'm like, I'm just listening to this my atheist coworker tear this guy apart, and I'm like, all right. So I get up. I'm like, okay. I get up. I just stand in the doorway, and you remember how exactly what Rick was talking about. You're waiting for that moment, right? So I'm just letting him talk and stuff like that, and I'm not saying a word because the Christian guy was trying to defend what he was doing and stuff. I'm like, not being a very good ambassador at that point. So they're doing something, and then my coworker says something. He says, "Well, I don't understand why Christianity has all these rules." That's the moment. I was like, wait a minute. Okay, so he's got a false understanding of Christianity. I was like, okay. I said, hold on. I went in there. Okay, stop. I said, I addressed my coworker, and I was trying to get this guy out, the Sharp guy out of the hot seat here. I said, okay. I said, listen. I said, do you believe that those who commit moral crimes should be punished? And he said, well, I don't know what you mean by punished. And a lot of times people say, I don't know what you mean by morals, but he's like, I don't understand why they're punished. It's like, do you think those who do bad things should be punished? Well, again, I don't know what you mean by punishment. I was like, if someone beat up your kid, would you want to retaliate? He said, yeah. I was like, okay, for the sake of argument, we'll say that you believe those who
commit moral crimes should be punished. And then I said, now my second question, I said, have you ever committed any moral crimes? And, he's like, well, I'm immoral, so you'd say yes. And I looked at the sharp guy. I said, have you ever committed any moral crimes? He said, yeah. I said, so have I. What does that mean? Bad news. Because we just said, we just admitted that those who commit moral crimes should be punished, and we have just admitted that we ourselves are guilty of breaking that. Now, are you interested in mercy? And it's like, I'm trying to get him to understand. Remember, the phrase was, I understand why Christianity has all these rules. Well, this is how I'm addressing it. I'm trying to maneuver and clarify, because he may have never understood the real message of the Bible before. So so what I'm saying is I started to talk to him. I said, well, Jesus Christ, God came down as Jesus Christ and took that punishment that we have just admitted we rightfully deserve, and he has taken that upon himself. He paid your debt. He's like, he took on the punishment for you, the full force at the cross. And I said, do you understand what a covenant is? And one of his exceptions with the other Christian guy was that he was using all these Christian lingo. Again, we're trying to clarify. We're trying to get away from the Christian lingo. And I said, no. I said, I probably shouldn't have used the word covenant, but in a sense that I said, do you understand what a marriage covenant is? Oh yeah, I get it. Okay, so he did know what a covenant was. It's an agreement between two parties, right? So the agreement we have with God, the covenant we have made with God, is that he will continue to take our sins away from us as long as we adhere to his covenant. What is that? Doing his moral will. It's not that it's a set of rules, it's an agreement. So back to what you had said about, like, oh, well, it doesn't cater to, or you said it doesn't apply to everybody, or it's not inviting of everybody. It's, right, not inclusive. It's inclusive to everybody. All you have to do is accept the agreement. By doing God's moral will, then you're covered, your sins are forgiven. So it's not a list of rules, it's an agreement between two parties. And he will stick to his end of the agreement as long as we stick to ours. That's the reason why we're not immoral. We don't go out and get drunk. We don't do this and that. Like, it's not that we can't, because we can. It's just we want to abide by our end of the agreement. So, and did this guy ever become a Christian? No, not yet anyway. But this, it's a first step. It's not. They don't have to take people to the cross at every. It's putting at every encounter. You can just put a stone in their shoe, make them think about it. This may be the first time he'd ever actually heard a coherent message based on Christianity. So.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Again, just talking about the character of the Christian ambassador, becoming the embodiment of all the virtues of our King, in the world that we are serving. It's a 24/7 appointment. There is no clocking out. Does anyone know anyone who has a lot of knowledge and wisdom but is personally offensive in word or deed? They're severely handicapped as even as a Christian. We may know Christians like that. They severely handicapped as an effective representation of Christ. Because it doesn't take a good ambassador to notice a bad one. My boss, it's interesting, my brother and I both have had a lot of work stories. My boss personally, he was, and I still have this boss today, he is very knowledgeable. He has a photographic memory, so he does remember a lot. He has this huge library of books that he works in front of, and he's read every single book, and it's ridiculous. I even gave him a copy of my Batman and Christianity book, which was really funny. He read it, and I used to go into work every day, and he would challenge me on my faith every single day. He'd make fun of me. My coworkers would make fun of me. Like, it was bad. I mean, because we'd all take our lunch breaks together, and we'd be like watching, because we worked from my boss's house, and we'd be like watching TV, and all of a sudden they'd like take a break and just start poking at me, and I'm like, really? Like, I can't, like, one day? Can I get one day without this? Or we'd be watching something, and someone would bring up something religious, on TV, and they'd be like, "Oh, Eric, you got to believe that, because you're a Christian." Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, But I could fight against him, and it wasn't. I could argue back, and my boss even told me one day. He said I was the only Christian he actually respected because I could actually defend what I believed, and I would teach him things versus anyone else he knew that was Christian that just didn't. My boss used to go after what he called Christians, and he started like actually studying out the early church. He started watching a lot of videos. He started reading a bunch of stuff, and he'd come to me and be like, "Did you know in early Christianity used to do this, this, this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know that. Like I've done the study. I've taken the history classes. I've done it, And so we would talk about these things. And you start to gain more knowledge about it. The only problem was that he would start to use this knowledge and stuff to attack what he called the Christians, the people who weren't living like he knew they were supposed to. And we had a 16-year-old kid that worked for us who started going to church. And we think about our kids who are starting to that age, the teenage age. Imagine working for this guy who just starts tearing you down like every day. And he tore this kid down. The kid doesn't, he doesn't believe in God anymore. He quit going to church. And I think a lot of it had to do with my boss, the way that he would just go after him, because this kid would work, after hours like that, and he would have these talks with him, and oh, you should totally, he and like Jehovah's Witnesses would go to his door, and he'd invite him in and have these huge debates with him. And I'm like, it's one of those things that he has the knowledge and the wisdom to do these things, but his character just destroyed any real credibility as he's definitely not a representation of Christ. Let's put it that way. And there are two extremes that we have in this world. If you want to go to the next slide, we talked about Homer Simpson earlier. One, we're so nice that we won't say anything that could possibly offend anyone. Ideally, neighbor. Or two, we don't care what anybody thinks, so we offend everybody. The guy on the end there. And sometimes in Christianity we can hear people say this too. I don't know if you guys have ever heard like a Christian sort of just blurt out what they're feeling, even it could be super offensive. It might be like, well, it's I'm being true to myself, or I'm just speaking my mind, it's healthy, and this is just who I am. Blah blah blah. They'll say something really offensive. Well, that's showing an extreme lack of character because there's no self-control. The Bible talks about us having a spirit of power, self-discipline, love, self-discipline, courage, love. No, power, love, and self-control. There we go. I was going to get it right. I did write it down here, so obviously I'm just trying to quote it. But that's, sometimes the word spirit can be translated as message. We have a message of self-control, of power, of love. And when you're not exercising self-control, you are showing off bad character. Why should people listen to you if you're going to come across, if that's just the way you are, then if that's offensive, then why are people going to listen to you? We can go to the next slide. We're not the bullies. 1 Peter 3:15 says, "But sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. Always be ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence." 2 Timothy 2:24 and 25 says, "And the Lord's bondservant must not be quarrelsome, but be kind to all, able to teach, patient when wronged, with gentleness correcting those who are in opposition, if perhaps God may grant them repentance, leading to the knowledge of the truth." We have to think about our relatability. As Chris mentioned earlier, sometimes we have to get rid of the Christian lingo. Some people may not know what we're talking about. Even things like concepts like when we talk about the Trinity, some people may not know what that is. You have to be able to explain these things and do it in a way that doesn't it doesn't offend people. Because the message of the cross is offensive enough. It just is. We don't to it. We have to be able to put on a crisp, clean personality, not become, in their eyes, silly and superstitious. But be a man or a woman with personal and spiritual depth. So the next slide we have is an audio recording. I don't know if how well this is going to play. Okay. It's a clip from Gregory Kokel himself. He talks about. It's funny when you listen to his messages. He always ends up talking about like his interactions with waiters and waitresses. It's so funny because he'll start a story and he's talking about a waiter, waitress, and everyone starts laughing because he just seems to have all these interactions with waiters and waitresses whenever he goes. But I don't know, Chris, do you want to take it?
Let me give you a quick example here, and we're getting ready to close in a few moments, but let me tell you just how this practically works itself out in my own life. When I go into a restaurant, there's always 3 things I try to do in every restaurant. The first thing I try to do is I learn the waitress or waiter's name. Last night our waiter was Sean, for example. And why do I learn that? Because it's friendly. You know, sometimes they sit down in the booth with you and cuddle up and chit-chat and everything. What's that all about? They want to build a relationship with the client, even if it's just for the meal. And that's actually kind of pleasant, I think. It's also convenient because if you want more coffee, you don't have to say, hey, Babs, Toots, you with the big hair, over, you know, you could say, Beth, you got a minute? Well, whenever you do get a minute, we'll have some more coffee here or something like that. It's just kind of convenient and it's friendly. So I learned their name. Here's the second thing I do. I leave a big tip. What's the big tip? 15% for bad service, 20% for good service. Some of you are thinking, 15% for bad service? I've never left a 15% tip in my life. Right, and every waiter and waitress in town knows who you are. You know when the worst time to be on the schedule as a waiter or waitress? Sunday afternoons and Sunday evening, right? Everybody comes out of church, they go for the afterglow. All the Christians, 20 people to a table. Everybody's got special requests, and everybody wants their own check. And then when they're all done, and the waiter or waitress is completely worn out, they stiff them with the tip. Oh, but we left a tract. And a tract is worth a lot more. Not to you, you tightwad. It costs you a nickel, for goodness sake. And not to that person either, because they know this drill. They've seen those tracts before, and they know what they're for. And they know that if they read this thing and take heed to its recommendation, then they'll become like you. And they don't like you. Why would they want to be like you? I'm afraid if I stiff a waitress because she's given me bad service, that she's going to think I'm stiffing her because I'm a Christian. And I don't want that mark on my testimony. So I tip 15% or 20% for good service, and frankly, usually we get good service because we're nice to our people. Now, sometimes they give the waiters and waitresses a little bit hard time, but I'm always there with the big tip, you see. By the way, the third thing that I do, I say thank you. And I don't say thank you just when they put the plate down in front of me. Everybody does that. It's a reflex action. They expect that to happen. When I leave, I get up and I leave the table, and as I'm heading out, I'm looking for Sean, or I'm looking for Beth, or I'm looking for Michelle over at Houston's. And I say, Michelle, we had a great time tonight. See you next time. Now, where's the gospel in that? Well, there's no gospel in that. That's not the point. I'm not giving them the gospel. I'm there as an ambassador. I want to leave behind a fragrant aroma. I want to leave the circumstances in such a way that if we ever do get to the gospel sometime in the future, I've laid a proper foundation. And I tell you, my wife is sitting here as my witness. We have waiters and waitresses all over town that know who we are. And we walk into the restaurant and they greet us with a big smile. And what are they thinking? 20%! They're glad to see us. That's a simple thing that I do to be a better ambassador. Very simple.
And I hope you realize what we're trying to do here is build a certain type of character in people. A character that commends the message of Christ. You know, when you talk to someone, we do that by three powerful phrases. And you do this to help kind of diffuse harsh arguments you get into. First one is, I could be wrong. You know, it's a great way to, a preacher could start his message. You know what? Or if you're giving a speech to non-Christians, like, hey, you know what? I believe that Christianity is true. Not true for me and not true for you, but with a capital T, true for everybody, whether you believe it or not. I could be wrong, but I'm not making it up, and I'm not just emoting. I have a reason, and if you want to deal with that, you're going to have to deal with the reason. And but saying, I could be wrong. We could be wrong. The truth that we're trying to convey is an objective truth. Objective truth could be wrong. But again, if you go in, you're not just believing it just because. Like that, and that's what you're trying to get across. How about I sympathize with your concern? You know what? Maybe some of us have, they bring up a point and it's something you've once thought about. I sympathize. I understand. You know what? I totally would, if it were my heaven, I would let you, I would let such and such, like, get by, this sin would get by. But guess what? It's not my heaven. So it's kind of one of those things. It's like, I understand. I sympathize with your concern. And, letting people know that you maybe used to think that way too, or people who think that way. It's like, but we have to get past our feelings and get to the truth of that, right? So, hey, that's a good point. A fair challenge or a reasonable objection. When you talk to someone who won't even acknowledge that you made a good fair or reasonable point, you're not talking to someone who isn't interested in intellectual honesty. That guy that I talked to, that I told you about, my conversation with the atheist at my work. Afterwards, I said, okay, so we're clear on this, right? So you're not going to bring this up to the next Christian. Guess what? He brought it to the next Christian. Like, exact same thing. And it was like intellectual honesty right out the door. It's like he was just looking for the fight. He wasn't really interested in finding out truth. So, but he knew it. So at least I got the message across. So, these statements, they soften everything. They make our case more reasonable. They invite consideration by lowering another's defenses. I mean, that's what it is. It's trying to get the defense down, because when the people put up defenses, they stop listening. And don't say something you don't believe. Like, don't say these if you don't believe them. I could be wrong. If you don't think that you're actually could be wrong, don't say that. I sympathize with your concern, though I really don't care. Come on, like, don't do that. If we can say these things, we're more teachable. If we don't think we can be wrong, we won't at least be interested in learning or being corrected. The key thought, and Eric hit on this, the key thought is the gospel is offensive enough. Don't add any more offense to it. But we add one more piece. We dare not remove the offense that is inherent to the gospel. We can't take that away. That's the whole point of this. Whenever people want to make Christianity a kinder and gentler Christianity, they start tinkering with the message to keep people from stumbling. Sometimes they remove the stumbling block of the cross. To understand that Jesus is insulin. Who here cares about insulin? The diabetic, right? It's like the message isn't try Jesus. He's a nice little, he's a good ice cream flavor. It's you are dying, and you need Jesus. Like that's the point. And people try to make him ice cream and not insulin. Jesus said he's the only way. That's not our claim; it's his. Yeah, you'll have to take that up with him. Okay. So what we're going to go into the next slide. So what you can do is a great self-evaluation with all this. As you start getting engaged with people, you need to evaluate how you're doing. You can tap someone on the shoulder, get a friend who may be listening and say, hey, how did I do? And you can do some self-reflection as well. Knowledge, do I need to know more? Is there something more I need to brush up on? Wisdom, could I have handled that differently? Could I have handled that better? Character, was it me who got in the way of the message? These are things to look at when you do some self-reflection. But then when you ask someone to evaluate how you did, number one, when you ask, one, be quiet. Listen to what they have to say. And two, do not retaliate. If more than one person says it, they're probably onto something. What do you do with the information? You take it, you internalize it, you pray about it to discern truth from error, and you go into your room and have a good cry. You'll get better at dealing with situations as you preserve being a good what? Ambassador, right? Okay, so going to the next slide. We got some rules for engagement. We're going to fly through these because we're getting low on time. It's not meant to belittle or humiliate people. Like when we get into the tactics, these are the rules. It's not meant to verbally beat people up, not meant to throw Bible verses at unbelievers. If doing that were effective, people would just take it and go, right? It's like throwing Bible verses usually is not effective. Not meant to force someone into your point of view. Prior experience is not necessary, so you don't have to have all this experience to get into these types of situations. Get a bigger picture of someone's argument. That's what the point of it is. Understand the person better. Looking for mistakes or flaws in someone's point of view. Waiting for that moment. Listening to them to hear what they have to say. Seek to understand by asking questions. Go into fact-finding mode. If anyone gets angry, you lose. So again, it's trying to keep an honest, down conversation, an intellectually honest one. Pray about your conversations and ask for wisdom. Go into the next slide. It's okay to fail. Guess what, guys? This is one of those, it's a learning experience. If you start to get into arguments or whatever, and you get your butt kicked or you forget to do something in particular, you forget some points you're trying to make. Don't worry about it. You'll get it. There will be another chance. There will be other opportunities. If done right, actually, you can never fail. So it's one of those things. Like once you start to learn how these things work, you can actually. It's almost impossible to fail. Avoiding foolish arguments. Obviously, we talked about that. Arguments are not quarreling. Not an excuse for not doing personal Bible study. You can learn these things and never have to pick up a Bible, but that's not, as good Christian ambassadors, not getting into the Bible is not good enough. So you're trying to plant the seed and let God do his job. Again, putting that stone in someone's shoe, giving them something to think about. It's not necessarily taken to the foot of the cross at every encounter. And at the end, you might be able to put an invitation in their hand. That's kind of the goal. And this is something even Gregory Kokel, the guy who teaches this class, says, I am not a closer. I cannot, he's like, he's great at teaching people and putting stones in people's shoes, but he himself says, I have not converted a whole lot of people to Christ. He said, that's not my job. He says he feels like his job is more of doing this kind of stuff, teaching people the facts so that Christians are better equipped to handle the world around them. So, if you want to skip, okay, Eric's going to finish it off right here. So, okay, so think about good and evil. We tend to look at things more of a spectrum between good and evil, and we, in our minds, this is the way when we see it. It's always like, this is what we want to allow to happen. But if we look at the way God looks at it, which we want to go to the next slide, the last slide, I believe. Oh, sorry. Go back one. Okay, this is how God sees good and evil. Okay, you're in God's eyes. It's like, look, are you following his Son or not? And a lot of times we meet people who are on this various parts of the spectrum. My best friend in the world right now is when I first became a Christian, he was like over here. Okay, anytime I bring up God, he would curse me out, yell at me. It was terrible. I remember one time I shared my faith with him, and he called me on my way home and just cussed me out. I'm like, just for sharing my faith with him. It was terrible. So then one day he started going through. I mean, he got under house arrest. His girlfriend broke up with him. He couldn't see his son. He was confined to his house. All this stuff had happened, and one night he called me at 3:00 in the morning. He lived with his grandmother. I thought his grandmother had died. I couldn't understand him on the phone. He was crying, and it was like I rolled over. I told my wife, I'm like, I gotta go over to John's house. So I went over there, and I went to his house, and we were talking, and he was sharing me the things that was going on in his life, and then he asked if I would pray for him. I was like, what? What are you praying for me? Pray for you? What are you talking about? And he's like, and I was like, well, let's just pray right now, and so we did, and he asked for the lessons, at the time when we still had the tapes. We used to give out the tapes all the time. I had given him a copy of a message Steve had done, and he took it to work with him. And he called me the next day, and he said he listened to it 11 times in a row. And he studied the Bible. He did not end up getting baptized, but he went from here to here. Okay, now I talked to him about biblical stuff. I talked about ministry stuff, and he's much more inclusive about it. He's much more accepting of my beliefs, and we can talk about those things. And he's actually encouraged by a lot of stuff. He's starting to see God's hand work in a lot of different areas. Now, is he here? No. But our conversations with people, we can get people moving down here. Maybe we can take someone here, and with our arguments and with our tactics, we can start to move them further down the line until they get to the point where they can make it here, where we can study the Bible with them and get baptized. And that's really what we're trying to do with these tactics. Don't always feel like every confrontation with someone has to be like, boom, boom. It's just not going to happen. Because having realistic expectations when we go into these arguments is key to truly helping people. And so anyway, but that's the class for this week. Next week we are going to get into the actual tactics. Again, we're talking about the Columbo tactics and a couple other things. So the next 2 weeks will be pretty fun. Make sure you tell your friends, get here early, and we'll have a great time. So thanks for coming, guys.